We'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comments. Nobody has approached me, and there's nobody in the audience, so I am assuming we have no public comments today. And the next item is the approval of the July 13th minutes, which were in the packet. What are your wishes? Moved by Leahy, seconded by Lemmer to approve the minutes. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. For the record, Chair Gibbs has indicated that he is stranded on his flight back from NACO and will not be able to join us today. So he is excused. Policy issues, recommendations of the Executive Committee for updates on the strategies, objectives, and expected outcomes from the 2018 to 22 strategic plan. And this was introduced to us a couple of meetings ago, and we have Vice Chair McEwen online, and happy birthday to both Craig and to Dan. We have two birthdays in the room today, or in attendance. And of course, Dan is much older. Right?
Right.
Would you like to cue up the discussion, Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I've been doing is meeting with each of the standing committees and asking them to make recommendations to the executive committee on updating the current strategic plan. There are three questions that are in your packet that the executive committee asks that you review when attempting to review or make any recommendations for the updates. Now, the reason for this is your chairman stated that this current strategic plan is due to expire at the end of this year, 2022. And the executive committee, there was a consensus that we update the current plan for another 2 years instead of scrapping it and starting all over with a new plan at the end of this year. Now I know there's three new committee members on the committee, and just I don't know how familiar you're with the comp plan and the strategic plan, but the comp plan is a 20-year vision for the county, and it has a total of 64 objectives and 209 strategies. And the strategic plan was developed from the comp plan by taking 12 of the 64 objectives and 53 of the 209 strategies for the 5-year plan. Now, I know this committee is not designated as a lead committee for any of the 12 objectives, but it's a standing committee, and you are a support committee for 3 of the 12 objectives, and that's 7.1, 10.6, and 10.12. I'm not sure if everybody got the email from Administrator Leonard a couple weeks ago on the most current updates on each of the objectives, the strategies, and the outcome measures. So I don't know the direction of this committee, Mr. Chair, if I feel that the HR Finance and Property Committee is a support committee for all 12 of the objectives that we have on there. But looking at the three questions that's in your packet, as far as new strategies, should there any new strategies be added to the existing objectives that are in the plan, the strategic plan? And number two is any strategies that are in the current plan, should they be prioritized? Now, the other committees, I didn't get any feedback as far as prioritizing the strategies that are attached to each one of the 12 objectives. They're listed, A through F, but they're not in any order as far as importance. And then the last question: are there any strategies or objectives from the 2016 comp plan? Those are the other the 64 objectives. Should any of the strategies or objectives be added to this existing strategic plan? And I know many things have changed since the strategic plan was adopted in 2018. And I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to review the updates that Administrator Leonard did send out to everybody on the current strategic plan. So I guess I'm open to discussion as far as how this committee feels they would like to move forward with any recommendations or changes, additions, deletions for this current strategic plan. There may not be a lot of changes. I know in the infrastructure committee, and Chair Robinson was on that, we had a quite lengthy discussion on the two objectives that that infrastructure had the lead committee on, and we did make some changes, some wordy changes, and some recommendations, which will be brought to the infrastructure committee next month for approval to bring those suggested changes to executive. So with that, I don't know. I know Chairman Gibbs is not here. I don't know how far you want to get into the strategic plan, or if you have any questions.
First of all, are there any questions of Vice Chair McEwen relative to the process or where we are? Supervisor Lemmer has a question, so go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's on. Is it?
Well, oh wait.
Yes,
no.
there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a way to get with this? I'm looking at the email that you sent, Lance, and it doesn't have any strikeouts or any additions. So is this the existing? The email that you sent on the maybe 4th. Let me go back. Yeah, July 4th. 2022 update on strategic plan process, the 2 PDFs that are there. Are those the updates? And so is there a strikeout where we could see what's changed?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So it is an update. The strikeouts, we didn't, I tried to note within the document if from the perspective of staff, an objective or a strategy was deemed complete, but I didn't cross it out because, again, I think that really the determination of whether or not a strategy is deemed complete or a goal has been achieved or an outcome achieved is one for the board. It's not one for staff. We simply gathered the information on what efforts we've made and kind of what the lay of the land was with respect to each of those items, but you're correct. I did not go through and cross off, for example, in the first objective 3.3, the creation of a trauma-informed care plan. We did present a trauma-informed care plan to the full board, which was adopted. But it is the board, in my perspective, it is the board's purview to determine whether or not that is sufficiently complete, or whether you wish to say, no, you know what, we want further examination or further work done. So you're right, I didn't go through and deem things complete or goals accomplished. Certainly in the discussion that Vice Chair McEwen referenced at infrastructure, there was discussion about, you know, are certain things deemed complete, or should we change goals or outcome measures, or add or remove strategies? But I didn't do that in the document that I sent.
Yeah, thank you, and that's a very good question. And if you, just referring to 3.3, the outcome measure number 3 on there was supposed to be completed by December 31st, 2019. And I just wrote on there was completed as far as the updates that the administrator had sent out to everybody. And example for the infrastructure committee, we did make some changes in some of the outcome measures with 8.7, which we changed. There was one outcome measure which we felt was needed to be changed, in that outcome measure said by December 31st, 2019, a number of households with high-speed internet access will increase by 9,800. We changed that to read, our suggested recommendation for changes, that 85% of households in Marathon County by 2024 would have increased internet or affordable internet. So we left the outcome measure, but we just reworded it. And like I said, that's that came from a presentation from Chair Robinson when he did an update on that 8.7 for us at infrastructure. So like I said, there we left some, we changed some strategies, we deleted a strategy, and that's just our recommendation. And I can't recall the exact discussion on it, but that's, yeah. And like I said, this committee, you have, you're not a lead committee, but you are a support committee for 7.1 and 10.6 and 10.12. Now, I don't know what the Chair Robinson wants to do as far as that. I did, when I was reviewing what's changed since 2018 when this plan was adopted. Just for example, last year the board, and then we adopted the rule this year, we eliminated the CIP committee. And those responsibilities are now the responsibilities of HR, Finance, and Property. I don't know if there's a strategy or an outcome measure or a policy that could be added with that. It was just an example of a change that took place between when this plan was adopted and now how things are as far as the responsibilities for HR, Finance, and Property. What we're looking for is, this this strategic plan, we want it to be this board's strategic plan. Going off the existing plan, but making updates on it. Current, there's other issues that have, came up that are now more important than they were back in 2018. I don't know, what they would be at, right offhand, but I know there's been some changes in some other things that have come up.
Supervisor Hart.
So Supervisor McEwen, I just had a question if any of the other committees that has more jurisdiction over more of these items have come up with, adding objectives or adding any strategies. I think I said this last time we talked about this, where we don't have direct oversight over any particular part, but we also have direct oversight over almost all of it as the Finance Committee. I think it could be effective if we got what those objectives are from the other committees and then saw what strategies we can utilize within our committee to help meet those objectives. And with that, my overall question is just, has any of the other committees come up with what they want to add or exclude from the current plan?
Thank you for the question. And I haven't received any recommendations from any of the other committees on any of the objectives or strategies, except for the ones that we changed at infrastructure. And the only reason I'm on that committee, so I went further. I don't want to make any suggested changes for this committee. I want it to come from this committee, and they certainly can be recommendations from this committee. And if if it would help getting recommendations from the lead committees for this committee to make decisions, that would be totally up to the chair in this committee. But I don't have any definite changes. Only recommendations I have are the ones that were made at infrastructure committee.
So let me try to
So
bring some more context to this. So what we're talking about today is whether the strategic plan should be updated. And I think the guiding document there are there provisions in the comprehensive plan, that long-term visionary document, that we might want to move up in there. In addition to that, later in the discussion today, we will have a discussion on what the committee's work plan will be for the next 2 years and where we will want to focus some of our efforts. And I'd like to just point out that within that context of that, we had a new role in promoting cultural competence in county employment policies and in the design and delivery of county programs and services that was inserted into our duties and responsibilities as a committee. And I think we might want to focus in on that within the committee's work plan and how we would articulate that. So we would have a strategic plan governing the overall county, but I think what we tried to do in the last 2 years is try to focus. We have 2 meetings of this group. We're the only committee that meets twice a month, and the first meeting in the early part of the month is meant to be an action meeting. This meeting is meant to be more educational and that special project related. Otherwise, we never get to those educational or special project related activities. So keep that in mind, that there will be, in addition to the strategic plan and the others, the opportunity for us to talk about what this committee might want to do within the context of our rules and responsibilities as well. But I think the issue before us today, and we don't have to act today because I think the other committees are taking some time, is are there things that are missing? Are there objectives that need to be rewritten? When you look at objective 10.6 or 10.8 in terms of not 10.6, 10.6. Work with North Central, the Development Board to ensure a well-trained workforce. We have a lot to do with attracting and retaining skilled workers, and are there some things that we would want to do? And Kim Weber is here today from the Marathon County Economic Development Corporation to talk about what they are doing. We may want to let her give an overview of what her activities are and then come back and revisit that after her presentation to see if that would move us, and that would be something that would be under the purview of potentially this committee and the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, as well as others as well. But I think we're going to hear about their strategic planning efforts and where they're going and how it relates to the county as well. So any thoughts right now, any changes? What I heard Supervisor Hart request was that an update on where other committees are, both in terms of are they adding new objectives or are they adding new outcome measures, and how might those impact the work of this committee or resources that this committee is responsible for allocating. Are you comfortable with that approach at this time? And we can, I think Kim has a lot that she could offer to us. And Craig, if you're not adverse, I'd like to maybe just deviate from the agenda and let Kim present without objection.
That'd be great. That'd be fine. I'd like to hear that information also.
So if you want to, you can come up here. And then you've got your presentation and, or your information, so. And welcome.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So I believe in here there's a copy of my,
Yes.
okay, perfect.
The last, from page 21 through 24 of the packet
Awesome, thank you.
is her strategic
Thank you, sir.
plan update.
So, everybody, my name is Kim Weber. I am the new executive director for McDevco. So I started in this role in November of 2021. And what I'm going to do is give you a high-level overview of what McDevco's focused on. When I was brought in, I was given a clear list of objectives for our organization to work on that really align nicely with your strategic plan. So what I'll do is talk through that, and I'll be touching on key points from 10.6 to 10.10, but if I miss something, please feel free to direct a question my way. But I just want to make sure I give you that overview of everything our organization is working to accomplish as an economic development partner for Marathon County. So one of the first building blocks of McDevco is our education and entrepreneurial programming. So McDevco has done a lot with local students to really increase outreach. So early this year, I spent some time at DC Everest working with their youth entrepreneurs. I was able to reach about 40 of those students by going to their classrooms and teaching. It's a concept of business entrepreneurship, launching their brand for middle school, early high school age students. So I was able to help launch that within their school program in partnership with their teacher. And then I hosted them at the Entrepreneurial and Education Center, which I'll touch on a little bit what that is in terms of the business incubator. So that was a really great experience for those students that we haven't had before. And we'll be looking to expand on that. So I was only a few months in role at that time and thought there's a ton of potential in this space. So currently working with Wausau School District, DC Everest, and have had conversations with other schools in the area to see how we can partner in the upcoming curriculum to impact those students in those youth entrepreneur groups. Also, I've lectured in partnership with BMO Harris Bank at the State College of Beauty Culture. They have an up-and-coming group of students that are looking to start their business as soon as they graduate, and we obviously have resources at the Entrepreneurial Center as well as at McDevco to continue to enhance their business acumen. So getting in front of those students and talking about being an entrepreneur and what that looks like and how they can expand in Marathon County as they graduate was a key focus. And we had a lot of traction, including some tours of our facility to hopefully get them started at our incubator. Those are just a couple of the things in terms of outreach where we've left our building. McDevco successfully leads a 16-week Gear Certificate of Excellence program. In 2021, we taught that program twice in the spring and in the fall/winter. Of the 2021 graduates, 3 of them have successfully started businesses in Marathon County, and we'll be introducing the 16-week program starting in September. So in a short month and a half, we'll be reintroducing that program. We're also looking to introduce a Gears Express, so we call it our Gears Certificate of Excellence program. That's 16 weeks. We need to make something smaller, more condensed for those business owners that are a little bit closer to taking that leaping point, or maybe have already established their LLC and their business and just need a little bit of help. So you'll be seeing that from us. Based on feedback from tenants and past students, we had a course on successful selling in June, a course on marketing, and we'll be hosting a women's entrepreneurship course here in October, honoring Female Entrepreneurship Month. In August, we also have a partnership occurring with the UW Law program from UW-Madison. So those students will be coming to McDevco in partnership with their attorney supervisors, and they'll be teaching a 1-hour class on something specific. We'll be putting out a survey to find out what do folks want to hear about. They'll hear a 1-hour lecture and then receive a 30-minute time slot where they can sign up and get legal advice under the supervision of this law professional. So all some continuing education and offerings that we're showcasing to the community. I touched on it a little bit. We have the Entrepreneurial and Education Center. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Entrepreneurial and Education Center is out on North 72nd Avenue, and that is the business incubator. McDevco was hired and contracted in January of 2021 to move into the incubator and manage the tenants and leases. So it's our job to help cultivate and bring businesses to the incubator that are either starting or expanding out of their home. So when McDevco took over, we were at 61% occupancy, and that's measured based on square footage. As of June 2022, we're at 80%, and starting in August, we have 3 new leases that we'll be assuming with very exciting traction there. Of those entrepreneurs, we have helped some transition to successful business ownership in Marathon County, and are really just working to get our space as full as possible. One of the more exciting is we were able to successfully recruit a business from Appleton just from them inquiring like, hey, I'm moving to Stevens Point and I'm not really sure what's around. I have a practice that can be mobile and web-based, so it was a great introduction for them to actually sign a lease at the incubator with us. And within our incubator, we try to create a community. So all of these programs we run, we try to really facilitate the feedback of our tenants, see what they're looking for, and also create a community. So we have a couple like businesses moving in. So how do we connect them and continue to help them grow within the community, further network, introduce them to the area, and make them feel more at home here? The next piece that I was taxed with when I was brought on board was the gap financing component. So really helping fund and gap finance startup or expanding businesses in Marathon County. Gap financing is a really simple way to say a project may not have the equity it needs to get the legs to start and move on in the community, and that's where McDevco comes in. How we do that is educating our community about, one, what is gap financing? The community might not know. Second is educating the financial institutions on that really cool aspect that we offer. So a lot of times lenders might say, hey, like you don't have enough equity, come back with more cash down or come back with X, Y, or Z. If they know about McDevco, we can help bridge that gap without putting additional hardship on that business owner that's trying to get started, and help get that business off the ground. So we have a couple different loan funds we operate, but specifically the Marathon County Revolving Loan Fund, we've expended $120,000 year to date this year, and are still taking applications. So that's very exciting to see those funds going out into the community to folks that are contributing positively. How we do that is I have officed out of some banks, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'll actually set up and I'll office. I'll answer questions from lenders. I've hosted info sessions for financial institutions to really educate them on the process. And now we're spending a lot of time really thinking about how we educate the community. So the banks are starting to be more aware of us, but how do we educate the community for the deals that might be coming up in the next few years as they really go through our programs, take the class, write their business plan, and then ultimately need to finance. And then the last component that we focus on is the Municipality Connections. So McDevco started a really cool initiative during the pandemic of hosting municipality meetings via Zoom. We're now hosting them quarterly in person, and based on some recent feedback, we've started really narrowing down the topics at hand. They were very broad, and they focused a lot on things that were happening in terms of COVID and things like that. And now we've narrowed it. Everybody seems to really want to talk about housing. So while McDevco can't fund housing, we're a really great partner to bring all those municipalities together. I believe we've got like 53 to 55 in Marathon County. Bring everybody together and have these conversations. Talk about what are other communities doing? What have you heard? How do we band together? And then ultimately helping facilitate that. So while we can't be involved in financing housing, we can be involved in other ways, whether it be mixed use and helping finance the businesses below, but ultimately bringing folks together. And we were also a lead partner with the Centergy-led tour, the familiarization tour. Centergy invited 13 plus developers from all over the Midwest to Marathon County, and we really helped take a lead role in helping get that planned and facilitated along with a few other municipality partners to showcase shovel-ready sites in Marathon County for one of the days. And then any sites we weren't able to show them just because of time, we made sure that we sent them home with site guides and packets of information so that maybe they can revisit our community. So things that we're trying to do to really facilitate things that we're working on within the strategic plan. You'll see in the plan, we also administer grants for COVID relief. So in addition to gap financing, COVID relief specific grants. So we administer on behalf of Wausau Cares, but we also administer on behalf of Marathon County Microbusiness. To date, we've granted 75 businesses with COVID funds, and $140,000 of that came from the Marathon County Microbusiness Fund, which we're still continuing to fund. You can also see total entrepreneurs assisted, 1,033 since the start of the strategic plan. in 2020, that could be a variety of things, from one-on-one mentoring with myself, my staff, to taking the classes, to be coming to our programs, to talking through their grant applications. So a lot of outreach within the community that we'll continue to do under our mission, as well as what's reflected in the strategic plan. I think that's all I have. And the POUTS, the Failing Septic System Program. So that is one that we're still in conversation with Marathon County. We're very excited to help evolve that loan fund to help the failing septics in our community as we, both parties, learn more. But McDevco is committed to being a partner in that space as well. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Questions? Supervisor Lemmer, then Leahy.
I used to be a teacher in the Wausau School District and worked with Junior Achievement, where they would come into the schools. Are you affiliated with Junior Achievement, or is that a competitor, or how does that come into
We are
play?
not. It's funny that you say that. I actually taught the Junior Achievement in my past life when I worked for Target. So really fun program. This is a little bit different. So this is geared strictly towards its youth entrepreneurships and what is your business idea, and launching the platform. So the budgeting, the hiring, all of that, and it's geared around, it's called eSeedling. I encourage you to look it up. I think you'd really enjoy it. And it's, I think she uses the simple example of a lemonade stand. So there are similarities and parallels, but it's about a 3-day workshop that we've been able to consolidate pieces to just give those students some of that exposure. Good question.
And then my other question is really about that business incubator, new topic for me. So if you could just explain, you talked about leases. Are businesses there for just a short amount of time, or do you have information on how long they stay and where do they go?
Yep, really good question. So McDevco is obviously new to taking over the occupancy management. So I don't have a ton of data from before we took over. I can tell you 3 businesses since we took over have expanded into Marathon County. And the idea is it's an incubator, right? So they incubate and then they get legs, as I say, and they move on into a brick and mortar within Marathon County. So right now, our focus is truly on filling the space. And then once we do that, the EEC board will help provide direction as to how McDevco can facilitate next steps for these business owners. Ultimately, like in my mind, what makes sense is the financing and helping them find available space that's not occupied, right? So we're not quite there yet. Obviously, we've made huge strides in our occupancy percent, but I think as we continue to increase that, we'll get more direction from the EEC board as to how they'd like us to handle that. Good questions.
The other Supervisor Leahy, did you have a question? In Marathon County is a funding partner for McDevco in a number of different programmatic areas. We provide a annual subsidy as part of the budget to them that has been diminishing over the years, and I'm sure that we'll have an ask coming forth in the budget process, but also with the POUTS and other things, they've been a partner with us. Any other questions? If not,
Mr. Chair, this is Craig.
go ahead, Craig.
Thank you. I just want to go back to a comment you made about affordable housing. And in our comp plan under 4.1, we do have one of the objectives is to promote a variety of safe and affordable housing options that meet the needs of all our community members. Is there, and I'm not advocating that Marathon County get into the rental property, but is there any programs or options that Marathon County could direct people to that would promote that 4.1?
You have it right here. I know specifically, Craig, I don't know if that question was directed towards me, but McDevco's financing and our funding that we provide to the community, we can't fund on housing. We've just been using the municipality meetings as a really good way to bring folks together to talk about it. But housing is not a space that McDevco's strategic plan has landed on. We've stayed strictly towards the small business owner and entrepreneurs. So good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Gail, we moved Kim up on McDevco in the presentation to talk about it in the context of the strategic plan because she gave an overview of her services. So we'll be going back to the discussion on the strategic plan. So if not, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your activities, successes, and challenges. So we look forward to working with you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, let's go back then to the discussion on the strategic plan. In light of the discussion from Kim, any other thoughts? And again, we will be revisiting this at a future meeting. And I know that Chair Gibbs, who couldn't join us today, is interested in some of those. But Gail, what we talked about, and Supervisor Hart had requested that once we know some of the suggestions on either new items for the strategic plan or new objectives in the strategic plan, that we would perhaps revisit them and revisit the role of the committee and figure out where we're going. So we'll look to the other committees' workload. And we also talked about the discussion of our own committee's work plan as a separate document. I know that you have an interest in TIFs and other things that we'll be talking about shortly. So any other questions, or we'll continue to place this on the agenda. We'll continue to review what the other committees are doing. I would encourage you to again, if you haven't spent some time with the comp plan, look at it. I would also challenge you to look at the objectives to see if the objectives are current, meaningful, measurable, and realistic. I think some of the things that we found relative to highway safety and the infrastructure committee is that it really wasn't definable or measurable. So as we look forward, are there some objectives that would help us better evaluate the effectiveness of the county's efforts as we look at some of these activities? Go ahead, Cody, and then Gail.
And then there were two, I mean, that kind of covers everything that we don't have direct oversight over. There were two that I wanted to give to Supervisor McEwen to take back that I believe we would have more direct oversight over that. One of them was Objective 10.1, ensure that every person has the opportunity for education and employment, and specifically the strategy in there focused on childcare, and that specifically relates to human resources because I know that can be a barrier for a lot of people. The example I have is when my nephew was born, my sister-in-law did not work because it was actually cheaper for her to not work and stay home with the baby as opposed to finding childcare and working. So that was one of the things I know that, we have some say over that. The other objective, I think it's 8.3. It's promote energy conservation and increase use of renewable energy. And that one was particularly what we're dealing with right now with the cost of high energy and the cost that we have in our budget. I know that the county government has the contingency plan and does a great job, but just to have that in the strategic plan so it isn't so volatile for us in the future. Those are just two that I had off the hand. So, McEwen.
And the latter one will be discussed as kind of part of the committee's work plan, or was part of the discussions last time, so we can save that thought. So, Gail? No, you need to use the microphone because we're recording it, or it's being...
I know at the last term that there was a list of objectives given that Lance had said need to be prioritized because when we give a laundry list, there's just not enough resources so we need to be cognizant of we can't do everything and that maybe pick the top 12 different things. I don't know how many you had requested in the last term, but like I said, I remember a laundry list and we need to prioritize.
So to bring some context to that, we have the comprehensive plan, which is a very thick document. And the county board went through the comprehensive plan and looked at the various goals and objectives in there and narrowed it down into the strategic plan. And, significantly and narrowed it down, understanding that we don't have the resources. From there, that document is supposed to drive the administrator's work plan, and the work plan keeps growing. And I think that we've had. That's what I was referring to. So there was discussion at the executive committee on how do we narrow the scope, because the administrator has, is it up to 40?
There's a lot of subparts underneath each one.
And you're right, the lack of priorities means you have no priorities. And when you allocate resources, it's hard to allocate resources 40 different ways and then deal with every new issue that comes in. So I think that's been part of the discussion and needs to be carried forward. And we as a county board can control that relative to the allocation of resources and the directions and the expectations of the administrator and that annual work plan. So again, you have comp plan, long-term vision, strategic plan, 3 to 5 year vision, administrator's annual work plan, and then we have, as a county board, the budget, which is our sort of annual priority setting that drives how we allocate resources, both in terms of personnel and dollars. So there is a relationship. We don't always do a good job of intertwining those and being consistent, but it's up to us as a board to do that. Craig, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just one thing, and as far as the last couple comments, those were very good questions. And what I guess referring to the comp plan and not adding any other objectives, like I agree, like I said, the 12 we have, we can't have the 64 in there. We would, if we get through those in 20 years, we'll be lucky. But I guess what I just want to emphasize on that, and it's very important, is to look at the current objectives that we have and then look at the comp plan. And underneath that objective, there are several strategies. Are there any of those strategies that could be added to the existing strategies that we have, or change it so that we're not necessarily adding another objective, but trying to pull a strategy that we don't have listed in the strategic plan, now move that into the strategic plan. And that's very important, because like I said, we can't keep adding more objectives and strategies. But is there any way we can work any of the existing strategies that we have in there? And like I said, there's 209 strategies. We have 53 of them listed there's 209 strategies in the comp plan, and 53 of them are in the current strategic plan. And I think some of those strategies need to be changed, or some of the other strategies that weren't added be placed into the current strategic plan. So that was a good point, but you do have to, like I said, in the comp plan, they have all the strategies listed under each one of the chapters. And like Supervisor Hart brought up the 10.1 as far as developing a policy to support affordable, high-quality childcare. And again, not to get the county in childcare. That's not what we're saying. But is there any policies, or are there any organizations out there that could help facilitate this? Because that has become a issue as far as high quality, affordable childcare, which is limiting some of our ability to have trained quality people work, because they do have to take care of their children. That's number one. But like I said, those are good points as far as, can we add any of those strategies under the current objectives that we have, and the outcome measures. So that's exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you.
I think the challenge to us is to refine the strategies and the outcome measures. So I don't know that we need to do that today, but if you could give some thought to what might be measurable, achievable, sort of realistic. And I think that that issue of childcare is, I was in a recent NACO webinar, and they said 35% of the women that left the labor force during COVID have not returned. And one of the, there are a number of reasons, but childcare is one of those reasons. When you start working and 80-90% of your paycheck goes to childcare and childcare expenses, it's hard to justify being gone for 40 hours a week or more. And so how do we, and I think that's one of the reasons why Administrator Leonard and others were heavily involved in getting the grant to study that issue here. But it is a problem facing not only us in Marathon County, but all over the country. And if we can be innovative and if we can facilitate relationships and partnerships that will accomplish the goal of lowering those costs or increasing availability, we will have succeeded. But we have to figure out what our role is, how it's measurable, and how we partner with others in that context. So give some thought to what those objectives might look like. And we can talk about that at an upcoming meeting. Anything else today? Again, this will be an ongoing discussion for the foreseeable future. If not, we will move on. I'm wondering,
Thank you, John.
thank you, and again, happy birthday to the birthday boys. We've got the birthday boys here, Craig and Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, committee work plan. Last term, the committee, it might, worked on developing a work plan. And again, I think one of the things that I noticed as a committee member in the past is that we had 2 meetings a month, and we always were dealing with action items, and we never took a step back and looked at the big picture. And so what we've tried to do is, again, have the first meeting of the month be the action items for those transfers and other things and we sometimes violate those and blur the lines, but then to have this second meeting of the month more of an educational meeting. We've talked about the capital improvement approval process, the procurement policies and other things in the past and other issues, and we sort of identified what we might want to work on. And we developed a list of activities, and Administrator Leonard has pulled those up. Can we enlarge that? There it is. I don't know if you can read that.
For those of you that are on the website, if you look back to I'm pulling from the packet from May 24th of this year, May 24th of 2022, page 82 of 82, and that is the work plan that was put together by the previous term's HR, Finance, and Property Committee.
And
My staff observation is you suffer from the same affliction that the administrator's work plan suffers from, which is there are too many things on it to accomplish in a term, but
yeah, I think that would be helpful. First 2 columns.
I'm sorry, what was that date again we're looking for?
May 24th of this year. But I can zoom in on and we can scroll through the columns if you would like to do that, Mr. Chair.
And maybe we can just quickly do an overview. Priority-based budgeting was something that we had agreed to do, and I think that it was a casualty of data, good data, bad data, or no data. And Washington County has adopted a priority-based budgeting system. I think the consensus was that we would wait for the new ERP program to give us better data that would allow us to do that and use that to drive our budgeting decisions going forward. So that's got a contingency of having good data in the finance and HR system. So I think it ought to be there, but realistically, our ability to do much with it until we have some time under our belt with the new budgeting system is limited. Would you concur?
I would. You'll hear me say this later in the agenda, but right now, the biggest challenge from an operational perspective as your administrator that I will tell you is one of staffing and staff capacity. Just generally speaking, staff capacity, we are not immune, and in fact, I would say government has been impacted more significantly through the pandemic than a lot of industries in terms of the rebound, and I'll talk about that later, but you also have, within your internal service departments, limited capacity based on the projects that you have prioritized to this point. As Chair Robinson referenced, the ERP, that new system implementation, some other things on your list are the evaluation of health insurance delivery. That is a significant staff, has significant staff impact within finance and HR. Class compensation study. Quite simply, your internal services right now are tapped out. I mean, I don't have capacity to do much more. They don't have capacity to do much more, I should say. But as it relates directly to priority-based budgeting, I can update a little bit on that. I did meet while I was at the NACO conference with the priority-based budgeting staff, and I specifically inquired about the integration that exists or doesn't exist with our new system, and I was informed that they do have a strong integration with the Workday system that we are implementing. What that means exactly will be determined at a later date, but right now we have not made priority-based budgeting a priority.
All right, again, these were what we had done last year, just it's more for illustrative purposes than necessarily a continuation of those as priorities. And these are in order that the committee ranked them last time. The capital improvement process, and Supervisor Leahy headed up a work group that made a number of changes, and we have modified the rules to take out the capital improvement committee. I think what we found was that there was a disconnect between the applications, the review by an independent party, and then the budgeting process. And I think what we were looking for is a larger role for facilities and capital management department to identify what priorities are and what really needs to be done in terms of maintaining our facilities, so we don't have a library roof go bad and a jail sag because we didn't come up with the capital necessary to deal with those, and to get into more of a review and a performance-based driven system. So I think we're playing some catch up, and that one we can, I think, check off as being done, and thank you to Supervisor Leahy. Performance standards, dashboards for programs, utilize strategic plan requirements where appropriate. I think, again, that, why don't you take?
I don't think we've updated this committee on it, but I can tell you that every department head has been, this has been a constant refrain in my meetings with them, that really we need to do a more solid job of identifying what are the metrics by which we'll define success for individual programs. If you look through the university website, so as just a real quick background, we partnered with the University of Wisconsin-Madison a couple of years ago through board action to address a whole number of projects across a wide variety of realms, and a number of them get at this idea of how do we assess program success and, in effect, measuring what matters. And I think we've made some good progress there. We still have a lot of work to do to implement that dashboard, but I can foreshadow within the budget presentation that I'm going to make to you in the next coming months, there is going to be a request for a position for a data officer. We've identified the necessary funding. A significant portion of it coming from the criminal justice alternatives budget, because that's one area where we have a big data need for kind of data analysis. We have a lot of numbers, but translating those numbers into insight is, I think, a real opportunity for us. So that will be in your 2023 budget proposal. And there are a number of other counties that have that, and we've drawn on some of their experience in putting that position description together, but that will be in that budget recommendation.
All right, long-term facilities plan. I think what we're trying to do, we've got a number of activities taking place right now, the West Side Master Plan and others. Where are we going with our facilities? And what are our needs going forward? What's sort of surplus and others? And we just, I think, need to get a better understanding of what we've got and what our needs are going forward. And
The only thing I'll add, and I put this in my update to the annual work plan that I recently presented to the executive committee, I think we're making some good strides based on the guidance from the board about this long-term facilities mindset. One of the goals is to shrink our footprint, because I think everyone recognizes, to the extent you can consolidate the number of facilities you have, there's functional adjacencies, there's just the benefit of not having to have quite as many parking lots to plow, is a simple way to put it, or not as many square feet to heat. And in our recent work to get the social services staff down to the North Central Healthcare Facility, I am very proud to report that, one of the things I've asked our staff to do is think about how to do this in a more, it's 2022, design a building for 2022 to 2050, not for 1985. And the space that social services is moving into at the North Central Healthcare campus, that footprint is less than 70% of the footprint that they currently occupy. So kudos to the staff for really thinking about how people work. And again, having shared conference room space as opposed to every department having their own conference room space. Those little things actually mean a lot long-term. 85% of the cost of a building is the lifetime operating. It's not the upfront. The upfront capital is the small part. So I think we're moving in the right direction. The West Side Master Plan is going to get completed. We'll have the opportunity to, and then later in your list is divestment of county properties. We're going to have the opportunity to think about what does that look like with our River Drive buildings in the very near future.
tax delinquents property process policy setting. So the county, annually, the county has to reconcile unpaid taxes. And we basically send a check to all of the other taxing entities, the schools, the local government, the technical college, and others. And we buy the tax rolls. And then we are allowed to, at the end of a statutory and ordinance-based process, take title to those tax deeds. We haven't done a very good job of that in the past. There have been cases where we've been, after the 10th year, we can't go back and collect at the time. We can take the tax deed, but anything beyond 10 years, we're left holding the bag on. So it's important for us to have a streamlined process by which we evaluate those properties that are tax delinquent, have a process in place for us to take tax deed. And I had a couple of constituents that lost their homes through the tax foreclosure process. And had we acted earlier, they would have had more value in the home and would have actually benefited because it was a homestead through the sale of the property. There's been some changes in the state statutes affecting tax deed sales, so we'll need to be updated. But we've been working with the clerk's office, treasurer's office, corporation counsel's office, and now it'll be CPZ to look at streamlining that process. And we have some more work to do, and I think that is one of the things that we as a committee should be trying to facilitate because of you have appointed department heads and elected officials, and I think we need to provide some policy guidance on that.
Be very brief there. The and it's later in your agenda, there's a budget transfer. And building on what Chair Robinson referenced, one of the strategies I've taken through administration is trying to make sure that every program, every job that we need to do, every task we need to perform lives in the department that is best suited to perform it. So the budget transfer you have before you today is really taking the property lister, which has lived in the treasurer's office. So if property changes hands or if a parcel gets split, that description needs to be updated. The documents get filed with the Register of Deeds office. The description needs to get updated, and the property needs to get listed on our land record system so that tax bills, quite simply, can get out. That job has lived in the treasurer's office, certainly because there's a link between that listing review and the tax bills going out, but the work is very much based on our mapping system, our GIS mapping system. And we have mappers that exist within conservation planning and zoning, and then we had a couple of mappers that existed in the treasurer's office. We're consolidating all of those mapping functions, mapping-related functions, where there's the most bandwidth, so that when we have a surge of property changing hands, which has been the last several years, if you remember reading my budget message, we've had a significant increase in land sales, that we can handle that surge without creating a backlog. So that's why we're moving those funds, essentially moving that position down to conservation planning and zoning, in part to allow the treasurer's office to focus on that core work. And one of the pieces of that core work is this tax deed process. Timely notifying landowners, hey, you're delinquent, and really being on top of that situation to try to, one, protect the landowner themselves so that they maintain that equity in the property as opposed to not taking action for a number of years, which ultimately bleeds that equity from that property, but then quickly moving through the tax deed process if we can do that.
The new position request process in ranking. Right now, in our ordinance, we have a couple of references to the process by which new positions are requested and the timing of those. In the past, we've had situations where department heads or elected officials have not necessarily been happy with the positions contained in the budget, and there have been efforts to fund those positions without any understanding of how they fit in the overall priority scheme of the county. So this is one of those items that if we get time to do, we will do, but I think it would be helpful to have a policy so that there are certain positions that we just don't have the resources for. And how do we prioritize those so that there's a clear understanding of how they fit into the overall scheme of the county? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering if there is any sort of update about the number of these properties we still have to work through. Obviously, I realize it's always changing and things are being added, but it does feel like we've really tried to tackle this last term. So I was wondering if there was any sort of a dent that we can see.
I don't know that I can report back that we've made progress. I can tell you, as it's referenced in my budget message, we did put in the budget, and the board approved money in the budget for the treasurer's office to essentially outsource the title research that needs to be done. That's one of those first steps if you're going to take someone's property for delinquency. In terms of taxes, you need to research that property and any and all owners, lien holders, and notify them. So we have outsourced the title research with respect to 50 properties that were identified by the treasurer's office to prioritize. I know that some of that research has been, the last time I reached out to the treasurer's office, they said they had received some of that. I don't have any more update other than one of the other strategies that I've tried to employ is to have our treasurer's office engage local municipalities, because really these properties are within municipalities and they have some that are prioritized in their minds. So we recently had a meeting with the city of Wausau about kind of the process we're taking and provided them the 50 properties that were identified across the county, so they're reviewing that list. And they've identified a couple that are of interest to them, because once we move down the process of taking the property, one of the first opportunities that exists in that process is for the home municipality to express interest and purchase that property before it goes out for public sale. But as it relates to your specific question about, what progress has been made, I think that's really a question the treasurer's probably better suited to answer, and I don't know if Connie is on the call.
Connie, do you have an update?
Good evening. We're, right now we're down to about 300 properties. We started with 412.
Connie, do you want to talk about kind of what that means, that backlog, and how it was you went from 412 down to 330?
We started off with the most complicated properties, which were the oldest. We started with the first 50. We have research done on those, and we're currently still sending out letters to those property owners. But in between, we've had people come in and actually pay their taxes. So we've had a lot of properties drop off the list. So right now, we don't have an accurate list right now because we're in the middle of tax collections, but we will have it probably next month just to see where we're standing after July 31st.
Thank you. Did that answer your question? All right. Any other questions on tax delinquency or the position request process? If not, evaluation of health insurance options. Former supervisor Fisher worked with administration to go through an evaluation of our health insurance last year. As a result of our discussions, we realized some savings, and I think that those discussions are ongoing.
Correct. We will be working with this committee to kind of bring back a recommendation, and you do have, this is dovetailing nicely with your budget assumption discussion that you'll be having a little bit later. You'll see that health insurance, the projection we have is 8.5% in that chart that Christie has put together on page 10 of your packet. And the reason for that is our current health insurance delivery system is we are insured. We're fully insured. We work with Group Health Trust they deliver that insurance product for us, and we have a not to exceed number for 2023 from them of 8.5%. 8.5%, as Christie will talk about later, is about $1 million. So we're continuing to work with our consultant USI to evaluate those other options, but certainly that's an item that we will bring to this committee prior to the budget, so that when we build the budget, we know which direction the committee wants us to go with respect to that delivery option.
All right, policy and sale disposition of excess county property, and that as we move and consolidate facilities, it opens up opportunities for us in terms of buildings like social services, potentially River Drive. The county also has excess parcels and property throughout the county. What is how do we dispose of that property? Is there a process we go through? Our request for proposals, qualifications, plans, evaluation, is an outright sale? There are some statutory requirements based upon how property was acquired. But I think we just need a policy in place for us so that we're treating all people equitably, and we've got a transparent process by which we go through and do that. But we will have some very critical need for that policy to be in place in the near future. Strategic plan, we're going through that process. Just we wanted to make sure that the committee we put time aside for our strategic plan, which we have done. The diversity, inclusion, employment policy and practice review is now part of our charge in different language. We had the Diversity Affairs Commission, and with that going away, we, at the April meeting, added additional language, promote cultural competence in county employment policies and the design and delivery of county programs and services. So we might want to make sure that we're dealing with that, so we might want to replace this language with what's in the rules, which we've been tasked with doing. So what we'll do is we'll just get the items that you think we ought to be talking about at these educational and informational meetings on the table. Then what we did last time was we gave everybody the opportunity to prioritize them, and we looked at the composite score, and we drove our committee work priorities off of that. So we'll need to update that. Customer service expectations, policy setting. When I worked for the DNR, there was an expectation that every phone call and email was answered within 24 hours. And if you weren't in the office, your voicemail told everybody you weren't in the office, and there was an out-of-office reply that you were out of the office, and to give a contact person if you needed immediate attention. We don't have a similar policy that would be in our human resources function. The question is whether we as a committee need to do that, or task management to do that as part of the ERP and workflow and other things, but that's why it was there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think from the staff perspective, we certainly have some opportunities for more consistency across all of our departments. I would go back to what the chair just referenced with the ERP system. Right now, my HR department is pretty well, again, they're at full capacity, but I think there's certainly an opportunity for us to visit that and kind of probably Q2 or Q3 of 2023, because even post-implementation of the ERP, there's going to be a lot of work to start to optimize that. The real question that I would have, and I think this committee, I would welcome from this committee, is what is the committee role in setting those expectations, and how can the committee support the organization's attempts to move that forward? And again, being visionary, I think we've learned a lot of things through the pandemic, and we are making changes to our ERP, which is going to be much more mobile friendly. We're having a new website, which is referenced in my annual work plan. That's going to change the way we interact with the public. The public has different expectations than it did in 2020. January of 2020, we interacted with people differently. It's been my experience that people are much more comfortable with things that perhaps 3, 4, 5 years ago that they wouldn't have thought they would be comfortable with. And at the same time, the workforce is changing. So getting some direction from this committee and the full board on, how do we start to think about serving the public in a way they're more likely to desire to be served, would be helpful.
Any questions? All right. Tax increment financing. I know that we've got 2 new members that are very interested in this issue. So the county is a member of the Joint Review Board for the creation of all tax increment districts, and looks at the tax increment plan. Currently, Christie is our county representative on there. There are some statutory provisions that apply to it. There are limits, if you will, on how much equalized valuation can be put into TIFs within a community, but we seem to be pushing that limit on a regular basis. The original intent was for a 23-year TID, and now they're 23 and 25 and 27-year TIDs, and I know you're very interested in this, and but I think it's something where we would like to sit back, familiarize ourselves with the law and what our responsibilities are, and whether or not we want to make any recommended changes to the statutes. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I also just wanted, I think we should quantify what the county is giving up in the granting of all of those exceptions. Wausau has exceptions, Weston does, Marathon does, I believe Cronin-Wetter does. All these exceptions have cost us dearly, and I would like to quantify what that is. Each of the municipalities has to put an annual report together, and so we could easily say this is the amount the county has granted the municipalities. And I think that that would just open everyone's eyes. I believe it's a number bigger than you would guess.
I'm not the record holder of that. The Department of Revenue would have that. Each of those municipalities have to file that with the Department of Revenue, and they're the ones that would have that centralized information.
So I think that, needless to say, there's a lot of interest in this, so I will be looking at it, and both from an informative and directional policy for the county and potentially requesting policy from the state. All right, property insurance evaluation. I'll turn that over to Lance.
Sure. That's really, based on the conversations that the previous committee had, it's really very similar to our analysis of health insurance delivery. Right now, our insurance provider for property insurance is through our liability insurance provider is an owner of our property insurance provider. Did I say that correctly, Christy? We have MPIC for property insurance, which is WMIC is essentially an owner of MPIC. Okay. So clarifying what are our options, if any, as it relates to property insurance or even liability, that was expressed by the committee as an area of interest, but there's not been any significant evaluation of that at this time.
Supervisor Hart, renewable energy policy. Determine committee's role in developing policies aimed at the county becoming more environmentally and fiscally sustainable. I think that can be done in the context of our new buildings and what sort of energy efficiency standards we might want to place on those. I think we've had some discussions. I know the city, for instance, is looking at the new water treatment plant, putting a solar array in there. It is not without problems where the neighbors are concerned about what that would look like, but I think that there are opportunities for us to be more sustainable, and ultimately, if we can look at life cycle cost on energy consumption within those buildings, we might want to maintain that on the list.
If I can add one thing, Mr. Chair, if everyone takes a look at one of the most recent releases of the Wisconsin Counties Association magazine, they had an entire magazine that talked about what are counties doing in that area. Again, I'm a big fan of saying, staff take direction from the policies set by the board, and if the board wants to evaluate or this committee evaluate what the county board's role could be in setting renewable energy policies, I thought that issue of the magazine was very well done. It had a lot of different approaches being taken, from everything from solar arrays to building practices to transportation. So just a plug for the Counties Association magazine if you do want to start having that discussion.
Updated procurement policy, thanks to the efforts of Dan and Mike, we have a new policy in place, replacing a 30-plus-year-old policy that didn't make sense. And I know that Administrator Leonard is encouraged by it and has started the training process for staff. And we have a second success.
Correct, and it will be one of the first trainings required for department heads through our new ERP when we get the learning management system module put in place. But just want to say thank you to this committee. I know it did a lot of work in finalizing that procurement policy, and it was adopted by the board as the chair referenced, and it's now incorporated in your ordinances. So if you're looking for late night reading material, I would highly suggest Chapter 3, the Procurement Code.
What's missing from this list, when we started this process, we didn't know about the American Rescue Plan Act. And that has taken a considerable amount of time, both in terms of the policy, the review, and other things. So I would like to suggest that we would continue to monitor and develop recommendations relative to the expenditure of the ARPA funds as a committee work plan item. Are there other items that you think we should do? Again, what we'd like to do is pull out the ones we've done, refine the language on some others to be consistent with the rule change, maybe clarify some of those points, and then we'll take the TIF and look at trying to incorporate some of those suggestions that Gail made, and then bring that back for ranking. And then again, the thought is that we would take this second meeting of the month and we would try to focus in on some of those items to make sure that we have time set aside for them, both from getting us educated and others. So we'll bring those back and clarify it. We'll need to update the language given the statutory changes in the tax deed sale process to get an understanding of that and some other things, but we'll bring that back at another meeting. Anything else that you think that the committee should be doing outside of our budgeting, review capital, and we've got those other responsibilities that are sort of built into the rules and other things? Anything else we should do, Supervisor Hart?
And this kind of can be rolled in with the ARPA funding, was the opioid settlement funding as well. And I kind of broke that in with ARPA as in it's extra funds for us in a way, where we need to set a policy on how to spend those items.
That's a good suggestion, and I think that's a separate, not a combined issue. And there are several issues relative to the opioid settlement. One of those issues will be, how do we and when do we get the money? Are we going to go with securitize it and try to get the money up front, or will we go with the planned distribution based upon the settlement? And then I think we will need a plan in place and how those dollars will be spent relative to behavioral health and substance abuse services with eligible activities. So I think that is a separate item. It sort of is grant related, but I think there are different timelines and expectations for that. So we'll add that. Good catch. Others, and again, some of these items will require involvement from other standing committees. It's not to say that we are acting alone, but again, they are some that will require policy and or budgetary considerations or resource allocations, which is why they're here. Other items, Lance, I'd look to you, Mike, Christie, see if there are other items that we've missed. We can always add them, but I think, as Gail said, the lack of too many means none. So we'll have to look at them. So what we'll do is we'll compile them, send them out, revise them, and give you a chance to prioritize them. All right. Thank you. We will move on to operational functions, 2022 intergovernmental budget transfers. I think Lance queued that up. Christie?
This one is just moving the amount of money that was already in the budget for a position that's going to be working from the Treasurer's Office to the CPZ department. There's no, and it's for the allocation left based on the amount of time that's left in the year.
Okay. What are your wishes relative to the transfer? I need a motion.
Chairman, I'll move to approve.
Kurt moved, seconded by Supervisor Leahy. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the transfers will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That carries. Discussion on committee responsibility relative to soliciting requests for the ARPA funding. That was a carryover item that was put on, but I think we've got we've got limited resources, lots of requests, but how do we get the word out to others? There's a lot of misinformation. I know that one of the county board supervisors said that they had heard from someone that there were attorneys saying that that basically communities were entitled to a portion of our allocation. And there's just a lot of confusion out there. We may want to do some additional education on our timelines and other things coming up in the future. And in light of the time today, maybe think about what you might want to know, and maybe we can do a FAQ, frequently asked questions, something to get it out on the website to help guide communities so we can steer it to them, so we're not answering the questions all the time and potentially in a different manner. If that's okay. All right, budget assumptions. Christy.
Today is a educational day, so we're gonna do budget assumptions, which are fun to do, because I will guarantee you that every single one of these numbers that I present today will not be the final number that you'll see at the end in November, because things change constantly. I do know two things that will be helpful to us. On August 15th, the Department of Revenue issues its net new construction and equalized value for the apportionment of county taxes, or the apportionment of county taxes equalized value, which includes the amounts for the county to allocate the tax levy against for all of the municipalities. That number helps me start putting together a much more clear picture where we're going to be at. But what we like to do right now is try to figure out where we're going to be at and how much fun we will have for the rest of the fall as we go through this. So I have two brief financial projections. We kind of do these. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is the budget assumptions that we're just starting out with. And it's based on the information we know as of today, which is going to change as of tomorrow. Especially this year, we talked a little bit about things that we're concerned about. That was the investment income, where we are at. We have an investment policy that means we want safety, liquidity, and then yield. So we want to make sure our cash is available to pay our obligations. We want to make sure that it is safe and secured, and there's a very long list of state statute required investments, plus additional ones that the county puts on it as well, and then that we do gain some interest on the money as it's being invested for us. Sales tax was another one that we talked about, that we believe that we were doing gangbusters, and as you see as the year progresses, that the increase in sales tax from 22 over 21 is at about 0.4% increase, which has been reduced every month this year so far. Some of the ones that we always talk about, which are, one of the ones that we talked about is health insurance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that one today and how that impacts our budget projections, and then just our overall budget assumptions. And with that, we'll get into it. What I'm doing today is going to go over some of your preliminary budget assumptions. I'm just asking for you to listen along and follow along and ask questions as you want. And we're going to do two things. One is look at what our financial projections are and how one of these key indicators can affect the budget as we go forward. So we're going to talk about health insurance today. What we are going to do is talk a little bit about revenue and our expenditure assumptions. And the one variable that will change between the option 1 and the option 2 that I'm going to show you is health insurance. This one is always a limiting factor for us because health insurance historically over the last at least 5 years, if not 10, has risen higher than the net new construction, which is kind of what our increase can be to manage our property taxes, except for last year. What we want to do is talk about what we will do right now, I think, is jump straight into our budget assumptions, and then I'll come back and show you how one of those assumptions can impact the budget as we move forward. So with that, this is one of our budget projections, and what I will do is I'm going to go down a little farther. Some of the things that we look at are, one of the biggest things that we look at, and I have no room. kind of do a 5-year assumption, and what we want to take a look at are major items are what property taxes we think will be, what the property tax increase might be, and that will be related to the net new construction. So if you take a look at what the increase estimate is, that is an estimate that we've come up with. We believe it'll be 1.35%, and it just happened to magically equal the net new construction that you'll see at the bottom of that page, because that really is the driving force on how high we can increase that. And again, net new construction includes all increases or things that get built up minus the things that get torn down, and it does include the increase in anything that is built within a TID district for us. The allocation of apportionment of equalized value for the tax rate does not include the increment. The increment in a TID would go to the municipality, but we do maintain the base property value within our ability to allocate and apportion taxes against it. So base value stays with us. We apportion the tax against that. The increment or increase in value as the time that properties are in the TID, that increment and the ability to tax against it for all entities, all taxing entities, would be then provided to the municipality. So that, I hope, answers a little bit of what we were talking about earlier. With that, the next one would be our sales tax increase. We talked a little bit about that. We had estimated on a little under $15 million for this year. We've come in at about 15.5, so we do have a little bit of an increase in that for next year. The rest of our but revenue assumptions are basically on our larger category items. You'll see on a chart I provided last time we talked, it was the revenues by categories such as taxes, interdepartmental grants, public charges, intergovernmental charges, miscellaneous revenues, and other financing sources. So most of those are why we allocate the revenue assumptions in that manner, because those are the big blocks that we account for. But we do split some things out that are important. Shared revenues, and shared revenues are stable for us. Transportation aids, and we are hoping for a small increase on those, and that goes to the highway. And then our intergovernmental grants are a little bit of an increase because we do have things that we need to accommodate for realistically, which one of those is ARPA. So you will have ARPA being used within your budget. You also have offsetting expenditures. And so you're going through that process now to see what we're going to be working with in regards to ARPA. So some of that you've already talked about. Some of those have been not evaluated through your process, but would be rolled into a budget process because that's where those underlying items are in our budget. They would historically come through as a through the budget process as well. With that, I will go on to the next page. That based on those assumptions, we kind of put a little budget together to show what it's going to look like. Some of the important numbers, and again, these are not set in stone. So when I say property tax, sales tax, this is based on the assumptions that we have today, which again are subject to change. The net new construction and again equalized value will come out in August, and that's what we will actually use for that basis. So this is just a best guess of people in the room at this time. We do try to keep that conservative as well. And this is what that would look like based on those assumptions. The next one that we're going to do, and these are the one that we've, is our expenditure assumptions. One of the largest places that we invest in is in our employees. And our reason for that is because we have a whole bunch of us doing all the things that we need to do. And there's a lot of things that make up the budget that pertain to our what we call personal service budget. So if you're looking at it from a activity level perspective, that's going to be personal service. The other ones that we usually break out are operating, because that's going to attach to your property taxes, debt, which has a separate property tax attached to it, plus income that or proceeds that have to be spent on the bonds themselves, capital, and then some intergovernmental amounts. So with that, what we are looking at in 2023 is increases here for wages, health insurance, WRS, dental, workers' comp, unemployment, and other insurances. That makes up our personnel budget. Debt service, the increase is to try to mirror the amount of debt service payments that we have to make next year that our tax levy supported. Operating would be the other general amounts, again, subject to change. We're trying to just put that together and figure out where we can be in that, based on the things that we know are going to be important, which are utilities, fuel costs, the cost of training, because we're trying to keep and retain our employees, but as we continue to cycle through people, we're seeing some increased costs in some areas that we typically don't. That's what we have today. With that, the one item that we're going to talk about is how does something that we put in assumption affect our budget, and what does that do for us? Today, that is going to be health insurance. So right now, we have health insurance. We are looking at the current provider. We've asked them to provide us some information, but as of today, what we know is that the agreement that we have with them states not to exceed 8.5%. So that is what we have today. I do not have another number from them. And we do know that that would be a conservative number. That is the not to exceed is the 8.5% by our current vendor that we use. So I've put that assumption into our budget.
You know what we are at year to date? Where, relative with claims?
I don't know if we have that. That would be employee resources. And because we are fully insured, sometimes we aren't always hitting that one on a timely basis. With just the single item at 8.5%, I wanted to show you what my current summary would be. And in this exercise we do today, everything else will remain constant. I'm going to show you this as option 1. I'm going to show you another option called option 2, and the only thing that will change is the estimate for what health insurance increase will be. So with an 8.5, and yes, you can move all these chairs around on the deck for 2023, but I think what I just wanted to do is kind of just show you if I have one change to a budget assumption, what the impact can be, and that's why we look at larger items, maybe not so much as what is our training budget, how much did you spend on that, because those types of things after COVID, our training budgets have really gone down. We are, again, having to ramp those up due to the fact that we are not able to retain people, so we're constantly going through training of new employees. But with that, my budget I've built so far is showing a a little over $1 million deficit. And that is all 100% attributable to what the increase in the health insurance would be at an 8.5% change. And as you see that impact, even with a moderated health insurance increase over time, or even moderated for some of the other items, I'm just looking at the impact in 2023. I would start off at a little bit over a $1 million deficit, and that's directly attributable to that type of impact on health insurance alone. And again, this is just an exercise, so you kind of see where we're at, and some days I'll panic and go, no, or yay, because I know how much that's going to affect our budget as we move through the process. With that, what I wanted to do is say, well, with all other things being equal, what would it take in order to get to a balanced budget? And I'm going to look at health insurance as our biggest limiting factor. So with that, I'm going to take a look, again, everything else being equal. And I'm going to just change the health insurance. And at this time, I've changed it to a 0% increase, which that would be great. Maybe we'll get to that. What happens if that is the only assumption for 2023 I change? And when you do that, and you can see I have it at 0. And again, all my revenue assumptions are the same as well. That gets us to almost break-even budget. Now, when we give you a budget, the revenue and expenditure will be the same. Now, it does include your levy, but we are required by law to provide you and you to the citizens a balanced budget. There's no, over here we're doing something over here that we're estimating that doesn't actually flow into what you're seeing. It will be a balanced budget. The revenues will equal expenditures, and that is how we work it out. So this is just for illustration. That would be actually deficit by year would be 0 increase by year would be 0 because we want that. So just in this example, just shows you a larger item that we do look at and monitor and what that impact would be. Right now, we know it's a not to exceed. What will we need to get that to if this was the only item that we were, really trying to figure out? It would need to be at a 0% increase for health insurance. And with that, I can go over any more of the budget assumptions with you, but I just wanted to kind of tell you the items that we really look at and we try to draft in order to create that budget, what we're going to be providing to you at the August meeting, and how one of those larger items would impact the budget if it changes, and what we try to monitor as we go through this process.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions for Christie? I think it's been very illustrative. Go ahead.
Just a quick question, because these numbers seem so big and foreign. When I've seen an income statement on the not-for-profit I'm on, I can see by department, how do like the health insurance and the wages, et cetera, each department. Are we ever going to see anything like department by department, how that fits, or is that micromanaging and not our role?
You're going to get if you take a look at the 2022 budget book, that's what we usually provide to the county and to the finance committee by department, but we don't break it out on that. Currently, our system is limited on its reporting capabilities. We have that for you, but it is not in a user-friendly reading narrative. So what we do provide to everybody right now is what you pretty much see in the 2022 budget book. Yep.
Just one other piece on that. It's been my experience, it's helpful to look at health insurance as an organization. Certainly individual departments, when Christy and I and Chris will sit down with each of the departments, they will have their individual health department, individual health insurance impacts on their departments. But we don't want departments budgeting for, hey, I'm going to guess if this person takes family versus single or employee plus one. Health insurance is always shifting. I mean, health insurance across our organization, one department might ebb and the other flow, but it's helpful to look at trends. And as Christy referenced, the trend with respect to health insurance is year over year, health insurance inflation has exceeded, at least prior to this last several months, general inflation. You're looking at in excess of 6% healthcare inflation. And just as a frame of reference, and I put this in my budget message last year, and I think it's been in each of the preceding 4 years. In 2018, the Wisconsin Counties Association noted that 60 of 72 counties, their increase in health care costs was exceeded their net new construction number. And the simple way to look at that is net new construction is the new money we get every year. That's the new number we're talking about all the time in terms of what new property tax money we're bringing in. And that was entirely eaten up by healthcare cost increases in 60 of 72 counties. It has been our experience likewise that significant healthcare increases have largely taken our net new construction number, save last year. Last year we actively worked with our current provider, our fully insured provider, GHT. We went out to market with a consultant. So as Christy referenced and as Chair Robinson referenced, we had good information about what our usage was. So we were able to have really strong conversations with our provider, and we got a negative 5% health insurance number, as opposed to the numbers that you see on our historical figures where they're up 6, up 9. And in my budget message, you'll see that a couple of years ago, and in fact in 2021, our initial actuarial review recommended a 12% increase. So putting 8.5% in there is not unusual. We know that's our upper bound because that's our agreement with GHT is a not to exceed number for 2023 of 8.5%. But health insurance for local governments is extremely important. That is one of those things, like Christy said. There aren't too many things we look at all that closely because the numbers are small. Health insurance is a big number. Sales tax is a relatively big number. We have been historically conservative on that. I think it behooves us, like Christy said, as you look at the trends, we will probably be, my recommendation to you in my budget will probably be a more conservative sales tax increase over what you might have predicted 8 months ago. But with all things that we're trying to prepare for, I think that makes sense. But the whole point of today, like Christy said, is just to give you an idea of what there's a lot of deck chairs. I like the analogy. There's a lot of deck chairs. Moving any one of them, particularly if it's a big one, has a pretty substantial impact.
And I guess I just want to follow up. We do provide, the departments do receive payroll budgeting amounts, and it does go by position, by FTE, by allocation, and also then does have each individual employee's information, including what WRS category they are, what health insurance we know for that position, may not be the person at that time. So we do have all that detailed information, but since we are a large organization, typically that gets rolled out from our department and imported into their budgets. They verify it for, is this the right FTE? Is this the right position name? Is this the right characteristic? Did they get an approval for a promotion? Did they get an approval for a FTE from a 0.5 to a 1.0? So that's all in there. That gets rolled into the budget that is presented to the county administrator. So I didn't mean to say we don't do that. We just do it at the more granular level at that point. And then as we roll those into the budget that's provided to the committee, you're going to see that by department in a group or by category, where I was saying personnel service, contractual services, those types of things too.
So just as a follow-up, it seems like it's unlikely to say we're going to get a 0% increase on something like health insurance, and I get it, that's just one chair, and so I don't want to fixate on that, but it seems like we're going to need to make cuts somewhere, and I'm trying to figure out how to increase transparency, because there are programs that I think are near and dear to my heart that, based on the Family Keys grant refusal, I'm just wondering if we can then get some information on, say, we might have a program that we've partnered up with that isn't statutorily required, but we've done it because it's a proactive savings later. Does that make sense? I'm trying to, I don't know. I don't want to.
Sure. So let me just tell you what we're going to have conversations about budget assumptions today, and we'll have more conversations later. I'll tell you my approach with respect to building the budget. And my ask of every department is we ask the board to be visionary and say, what do you want us to look like in the next 50 years or 20 years? Our job as staff, my job as your administrator, I don't expect you to go through, and I think it's a poor use of your time to go through and say, you know what, you can get a better deal on paper if you go with Dunder Mifflin as opposed to Staples. That's my job. That's our staff's job. The same thing with individual delivery models for programs. So for example, I task, and it's in my work plan, I've tasked with respect to some big ticket items, I've asked staff to evaluate, in light of the board's preference, that, hey, we're going to deliver just for example, a home nurse, a home child monitoring program. Start Right has been the model that we've used. I've asked every department to look at all of their programs and say, is there a way to deliver that program, that nurse home visiting? Is there a different model that we can use that will deliver still high quality results based on the board's desire for those programs in the past, but do so more effectively? Health insurance is a thing we've evaluated. We need to provide health insurance. We have been self-funded a number of years ago. The board made the determination based on a cost-benefit analysis at the time to go fully insured. We went through GHT last year, a little bit more than a year ago. We started evaluating to control those costs from the staff perspective, evaluate reach out to a consultant, make sure we had strong data so we could engage in strong conversations with our current insurer, but also look at, are there different models that might be more financially advantageous to the county? That's staff's job. If you as the policymakers want to determine, hey, we want to cut programs, absolutely. That's a policymaker job. What programs do we want to deliver? If you say we no longer want to deliver nurse home visiting, have that discussion, you tell me, and we'll build a budget that will do that. My process moving forward is I'm going to strive to deliver everything you have historically, you as the board over time, have told me you wanted to deliver. So I'm going to try to do the exact same thing we've done in terms of programs in previous years and do it through efficiencies or the money that we are allowed to bring in through the limited means we have. That will be my goal. If I can't meet it, I will ask you to make those cuts. If you determine you want to move things around and say, hey, we want more of X and less of Y, that's certainly through the budget something you're going to have the opportunity to do. But as Christy alluded to, and as I tried to say, it has not been the practice, as far as I know, as long as I've been here, and I believe, based on the lore passed down to me over time, the board hasn't gone line by line through the budget to say, office supplies in county administration, we want to take down from $5,450 to $5,250. That's my job. That's what our individual meetings with the departments are going to be, is like, what really has been your usage? Where's your opportunity? Where can we collaborate internally in terms of, right now you're procuring a service from an outside vendor. Is there a way for us to do that internally? I mean, we went out, this is about as sexy as it gets for us. We went out and we did an RFP for copier scanning services a number of years ago. It saved us money. We didn't ask the board to do that. That's our job to go evaluate, how we should get copies made, a printing contract, those sort of things. That's our job. We're asking you to be the big picture people. But through the budget, you will have the opportunity if you want to rearrange the deck chairs. Absolutely.
One of the other reasons that we also highlight health insurance is because the environment has changed rapidly over the last several years. Even with some of the vendors, we were self-insured. One of the groups that we were a part of no longer exists. We work with GHT. One of the groups of a similar type of co-op would be WEA Trust, who will cease, I believe, operations at the end of this year. So there may be new ways of looking at health insurance delivery to us, but some of those that were there for all the previous years are also gone. So it's a little bit of a changing market. We're not really sure where we fit anymore or what will be viable in the future too. So that's another kind of wrinkle into the health insurance.
Other questions relative to the assumptions? We will be going forward, but this gives you just a little bit more of a understanding of how we go about developing the budget. So, all right, thank you, Christy. Next, an update on, before I forget, Yiling Zhang had contacted me and I just saw the email and he asked to be excused. So for the record, he is excused from the meeting. So with that, we'll go on to the updated class compensation study.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this one. I'll be I shouldn't say very brief, because I don't know how often that happens, but I'll just start with kind of a little bit of background, because I know there's some new members, but it's also just good refresher. The county board had directed administration through the annual work plan process to go through and update our class compensation, our class schedules. And that was actually on the radar pre-pandemic, but certainly over the last several months, it's taken on a bit of higher priority. Historically, we had not done a class compensation, a full-blown study for a significant number of years. What you have seen, and I know everyone has seen this in the past, is we have seen significant growth in the private sector as well as the public sector in terms of wage growth. So I just want to start with a little bit of background about how Marathon County has operated through its pay schedule system. And all of our schedules are available online. If you go to the Employee Resources website and click on policies, you can see our compensation grid, our compensation schedule. We have not operated as a great many counties operate in terms of steps. You've probably heard of it, like a step system. Each year you serve in a role, you move up a step. We have operated through a pay-for-performance system. That is, we evaluate each and every year. We have a defined amount of funds. Those are allocated based on individual performance within individual departments. When we've allocated those funds, I think it's important to point out we have historically not separated out from those pay-for-performance dollars cost of living adjustments. So last year, if myself as an employee, I live within a department and Christy is my boss, last year she had 3% to utilize to assess where their performance was and what compensation increases to give. We have not said it's 3% plus everyone gets a 2% cost of living. Very frequently you see organizations operate in that fashion. There's a cost of living adjustment along with a pay for performance component. So then I just want to fast forward just a little bit and talk about the environment in which we currently live, and I know this is review for a lot of people. We have this study that's ongoing with McGrath, and the bottom line up front for this presentation is you will hear from people far smarter than I at your next meeting. Our consultants from McGrath will be here to talk through where their analysis is at this point and give you some recommendations. You saw in your budget assumption slide that Christy had up there that we had 8% as a placeholder for salary increases. That isn't a number that we pulled out of the dark. That's the best information we have, and it's a bit less than what our initial recommendation from our consultants was at the time, but they're still finalizing their work. But we are working with them. You'll hear from them kind of where we live as an organization right now, what they're seeing in terms of trends, but also trends they see outside of the county. And in terms of trends that exist outside of Marathon County, I just had the pleasure to attend the National Association of Counties Conference and attended a great many presentations, one of which talked about the impact of the pandemic on workforce and workforce retention within government as well as the private sector. Both were very significantly impacted by the pandemic and the responses that were implemented during the pandemic. I'm sure doesn't surprise anyone that there were significant job losses, both on the private sector and public sector during the pandemic. It was very surprising to me to learn. One of the presenters indicated that, and these are my notes, and I think it's accurate, but it could be somewhere within the realm of accuracy. 640,000 jobs. There's 640,000 fewer jobs in government today than there were pre-pandemic. The private sector has returned to pre-pandemic job employment numbers. That was surprising to me, so much so that, I trust but I verify, so I just went out to the all-knowing Google, searched that, and did find a number of news outlets that had similar reporting. That was surprising to me. That is somewhat consistent with what we're seeing in local government here. We have, as Christy alluded to today, and as for those of you that watched the presentation at Public Safety with respect to our correctional division in our sheriff's office, or Molly's recent presentation with just general turnover, we have a lot more turnover within our organization than has historically been the case. So the fact that there's kind of job losses in terms of filled positions is not surprising to me. Local governments in Wisconsin have, for those of you that have been on the Wisconsin Counties Association calls, you'll have heard these actions that have been taken by local governments. Everyone is addressing the same struggles, whether you're local government or a private industry. retention and recruitment is a challenge, and steps are being taken by organizations to remain competitive. One of my colleagues in a northern county reported to me, and I saw their board did take this action. They approved a 9% across the board increase in terms of their step schedules. And then in addition to that, they had specific additional increases in certain departments where they were having additional issues. The city of Wausau just did a mid-year adjustment. We have not done a mid-year adjustment here in the county. They did a mid-year 2% adjustment to their in addition to their normal processes. So encourage you, if you haven't been following on the Wisconsin Counties Association, those discussions, certainly a lot of information available there. So again, bottom line up front, the implication of this class compensation study that McGrath is going to present to you where they are and their initial findings, it is going to have a financial component to it. We have historically been in that 2% to 3% wage increase bucket for a great many years and have not made substantial shifts in our schedule. Quite honestly, we were behind before the pandemic. We needed to do a class compensation study. The pandemic has exacerbated things, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone. So we're going to bring that information. McGrath, I should say, is going to bring that information to you. I don't have a final report. I'd love to tell you what it says. I don't know. We will learn together. But this is really, my discussion today is just to get you thinking. Where I'm going to be looking to this body and the full board as policymakers really are in a couple of key things. I'm hoping that our pay schedule that the board will adopt helps us meet the needs of Marathon County residents and guests. I said it in our initial orientation with all board members, government service is it's a people business. We need high talented, highly skilled people to deliver that work. You've heard from departments in the past about our retention struggles, and turnover has been a challenge. Molly did a nice couple of infographics about that. There are direct costs with that, and we can get you additional information, but overtime, certainly in the sheriff's office, has been one. Contractual work, you've heard from, if you're on the Public Safety Committee, or if you've watched their meetings, you would have heard me reference the fact that we are housing out about 50 extra inmates because we don't have the corrections staff to operate the block to keep those people in-house. We've shut down our juvenile detention center to move those corrections workers back into our adult correction system, and we're still having to house those inmates out. Indirectly, and this was a big conversation at the National Association of Counties, it is having an impact on staff. I think that's certainly the case locally, but a lot of our operations, we have to continue to deliver that work. We have, and that's stressful when you have kind of a vacancy rate of 20%, 15, 20%, but the work needs to be done by the remaining people on the job. That has ancillary impacts on staff. And then we have delays with respect to the work that we do. So I'm hoping that through our conversation with McGrath, we find a way to make sure we deliver on the expectations of Marathon County's residents and guests. We develop a schedule that serves the organization and allows us to continue to recruit effectively. We are going to have turnover. We have a lot of it right now, as does everyone, but we need to have a schedule that is going to allow us to not only be successful now, but post whatever this is, the great resignation or whatever you want to term it, we're going to need a schedule that is sustainable. So those are my questions for this committee, is how do you start to think about those things? How do we develop a schedule that, from a policymaker perspective, mirrors the values of our organization? We have values about, how do we certainly be financially responsible? It needs to be sustainable. We need a schedule that's not outdated the day we adopt it. And I think certainly staff appreciate, we are not going to be able to have a schedule that far outpaces the market. We're not going to be Google. My brother works for Google. I know there's a little bit about their schedule. Washington County, I mean, their comp ratio target that they set is 75%, a 0.75 comp ratio. So market is 0.5. You as the policymakers need to sit down and say, who do we want to be? And McGrath will be available to answer questions about what they're seeing. But this is a very important exercise. I think it's certainly more important. I'm recognizing its importance more than I certainly would have 2 years ago, based on just the environment in which we're living. But we've been very satisfied with McGrath at this point. I think they've done a good job. They've been very attentive to, what we're able to get done. They ask good questions during our meetings. And I look forward to their delivery on August 10th of that information. But just wanted to make you aware that we're going to be having those conversations on August 10th. Start thinking about, how you're going to shape the organization from a policymaker's perspective with that schedule. But if you have any questions, happy to try to answer them. Or if you have things you're going to want to see from McGrath, I can at least make them, hopefully prepare them for those questions.
Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm wondering, as this study is going on, and you're obviously talking to department heads constantly about this issue and with HR, are there conversations also happening about, we talk about remote work a lot as being kind of a consequence and a potential opportunity that we've discovered through the pandemic. Are kind of radical conversations happening about changing these positions in a big way to accommodate the shifting workforce patterns and, increasing wages? Not just remote work, but any ideas that might be coming out from department heads that would help offset some of these costs?
The short answer is yes. I mean, we are having conversations pointedly about kind of what we're calling hybrid work. How much do people need to be in the office? We have a lot of departments now that work fundamentally differently than they did before. I brought up social services and the footprint that the reduced footprint. That's one of the primary drivers of that is the idea of remote work. Looking at, on the far end of what we're looking at, do we need to have employees for specific work? Each department, in my mind, has opportunities to say, hey, what was necessary in terms of staffing to perform our work years ago perhaps isn't the right delivery model now. I hope through the delivery of our website, we identify positions that are no longer needed to do the things they were done in the way they were done before, and we can reallocate those staff members to higher order work. But we're having those conversations all the time. I think, as Christy alluded to, one of the real things we're seeing over the last year has been the impact of turnover on training. I mean, there is a cost to turnover. Lost productivity and also just decreased productivity on the part of the people that have to train the individuals that are filling those seats. And one of the things that I know McGrath is going to talk to you about, and this was something I, again, attended a presentation at the National Association of Counties about, is the significant shift we've seen in terms of tenure within local government as a whole, but even in Marathon County. And I know McGrath has some detail information on what our average length of tenure is, and I can remember them telling me it's 9.5 years. The average in local government is between 6 and 7. But you will see from their presentation, we have a lot of people who have been here between 20 and 29 years, and we have a third of our workforce is 0 to 3 years. There is a significant implication of those 20 to 29 year staff turning over, and you see it in a lot of local governments. And it's not it doesn't have a positive impact on service delivery. Our tenured staff know their jobs very, very well. So to your point, one of the things that I've, specific conversations I'm having with department heads, because that's who I interact with directly, is every one of them needs to have a succession plan for themselves, and they need to start thinking about that for their key staff. All of our staff are important, but we certainly have, there are deck chairs that when we move them or when they go away have a significant impact. So we're having all those conversations, but the one that is directly in front of us right now is the class compensation.
I just want to interject some comments. There are certain departments that we cannot go to remote work. We can't put a jailer at home with the population here. We can't have highway patrol. The plowing and maintenance activities can't be done remotely. So we're limited in where we can go. And the administrator and I had a conversation earlier today relative to this. And while the statistics are important, I think we also need to begin to pull together the data relative to the lack of jailers or corrections officers has resulted in X amount of overtime, X amount of transport costs to other county facilities, and what are those costs? Because this is a significant problem, and when you take those officers and transport somebody, not only do you lose the people on the street for patrol, but you have additional costs. We need to have a better understanding of that as we go into these discussions to put it into perspective, because it will be a large number. So Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I mainly asked just, when we were looking through our proposed work plan for this committee, a lot of those items that relate to HR, I guess I'm just wondering, should that policy really be starting with us, or should we be listening to what department heads and what the HR department is already doing and what they're finding actually doing the work and doing the recruiting and such? And should we help shape it when they ask us to, or when we do need to make a policy decision across the board? But I guess sometimes I just wonder if we should be listening to them first and not just saying, we think you should be at your desk from this time to this time, because that's not maybe the best use of this committee either if there are other priorities we could be working on.
Yeah, that's a good question I'll have to think about. My initial inclination is, I think Molly's, if you go back to your last meeting, she had a couple of infographic slides that show you what our projected year-over-year turnover is, what some of the things we've been hearing in our exit interviews have been. And I think that will help inform you with respect to, along with any other information you asked me to get you. But I hope that's informative when you look at class compensation. In terms of what department heads are experiencing, I can bring that information to you. My challenge, the thing I'm looking for the committee to set is really the policy in terms of what are your expectations. As Chair Robinson referenced, there are some jobs that very clearly remote work is not even an option. For the rest, and I would say it's probably on the order of certainly less than half have the opportunity for significant remote work. I mean, social workers do remote work, but they've always done remote work because they're out in the community doing things. But they have to be in the community, and that's, I think, an important distinction between, you can't be a social worker for Marathon County and be located in Duluth or Miami-Dade County. You have to be in the community. The majority of our jobs are those sort of jobs, the significant majority. On the margins, flexibility is extremely important. Having the ability for us to flex time for staff, provided they're not working a window in our clerk of courts. I'm sorry, if a staff member says, hey, I'd really like to work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and I'm a window clerk in the clerk of courts, the building's closed. It doesn't work. So flexibility where we can deliver it is really important. You know, I think the board is going to have a lot of discussions, and other boards in the state are having them as well, about what does customer service look like, as Chair Robinson referenced. Price County just approved, I believe, going to 4 days and half-day Fridays. I believe Chippewa is doing the same thing. Other counties have. In other states, they've been at a 4-day work week in government for a long time. For staffing reasons, and because if you change the hours of when you're open to the public, you know, it's hard, trying to get here if you need to pay your taxes or get a marriage license. We close at 4:30. A lot of jobs go till 4 or 4:30, and trying to get here is a challenge. So if we opened up those hours to say, hey, even 5 o'clock, you know, the board is ultimately going to be I can bring you recommendations, but you need to decide what is the level of service, what does customer service look like, what are you going to approve in terms of service delivery? That's the policy making I'm looking for from the board. I can bring you a whole plethora of things, but it's what is the board willing to, what organization do you want me to make? Because I can make you what you want. I just need to know what that looks like.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You talked about the National Associations of Counties talking about how jobs in the private sector have returned from pre-pandemic levels, but not in government. Did they provide any particular reasons why government isn't doing as well in bringing those jobs back? Is there any overall, is it all wages? Is it because these jobs are difficult and those are hard to come back after the pandemic, or the flexibility?
Good question. There wasn't data given on what, like a root cause analysis, but anecdotally, they had a panel, and one of the members was a county board chairperson. I can't remember from what state, and they had a couple other professionals. Anecdotally, certainly compensation and the significant kind of gap in how quickly private sector compensation has increased comparatively to public was one thing that was, again, anecdotally mentioned. Another was just the general stress within the government sector that, you know, for a lot of our work, as Chair Robinson referenced, the pandemic didn't mean things stopped. And in fact, the requests, the need for government service increased. And the fact that we've had the gap of that within local government, you've had fewer staff because of the turnover and the expectations, and the need to deliver on the services was still there. So you have fewer people doing the work of what would be a fully employed staff. Those were things that were mentioned. I think it's really important to note, and I want to make very clear, whatever class compensation schedule you adopt, it's not going to be a silver bullet. We need to do all the things that you've talked about, Vice Chair Leahy. I can say we have made workplace culture has been a strong area of focus for Marathon County long before I've been in administration, let alone the administrator's chair. We have conversations with staff trying to understand what they need. We have historically invested in training and development. We have a strong reputation in the state for that. That is one thing, as Christy referenced, during the pandemic that's been challenging. And I think we have some opportunities to kind of reinvest in those areas. But the first thing we're going to bring to you is the information from McGrath. But if you do have additional information, as the chair referenced, on specific areas, I can try to bring that. But I do think the idea of understanding what the impact of turnover and retention has on our service delivery is certainly something to, if I were in your seats, I would give some thought to.
Anything else? I'm sure, Gail, you'll have some contributions from the private sector as we go through this discussion. Anything else? If not, thank you for that update. How much time do you think we'll need for McGrath at the next meeting?
I'm not sure. That'll be one of the first things. I'll reach out to
I think we'll have to be careful because I think we're going to want to make sure we have enough time to go through that. So we may have to look at what else we have from an actionable perspective and look at that, or give you a heads up that it may be a longer meeting. We'll try to keep that in mind when we're planning that. Anything else that you'd like to bring before us for future discussion items? We've got enough on our plate for a while. All right, the next meeting is August 10th with McGrath and others. We'll try to be cognizant of time management for that meeting, but give us time to have that discussion that Supervisor Leahy prompted, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot to talk about. If not, item 9 is before us. What are your wishes relative to adjournment? Supervisor Hart, moved, seconded by Lemmer. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. So Kurt, do you have a ride home? Or flight home?
Still working on it. There's a plane in a spot. So my hope is he doesn't change and cancel because of weather. But there's supposed to be some weather in Mosney about the time we're supposed to land. So I don't know yet.
Good luck.
Thank you.